You are living in the most dangerous time in American history.
We won't take a single back step.
Former professional basketball player is now the Republican Party's choice.
Can you imagine Royce White, the U.S. Senate?
White won the endorsement on May 18th with 67% of the vote.
There's nothing that guarantees we win, but I guarantee you if we lose, we will die. Welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and powered by our favorite sponsor, TireGit.com. That's TireGit.com. You have to buy tires from somebody. You might as well buy them from us and help fund the movement and help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I'm your host, Royce White, here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and this is episode 241. Today we have another incredible guest for our Family and Friends edition, Dr. Pierre Kory, who was on the front line of a good number of controversies during the pandemic years, the recent pandemic years. First and foremost, the use of corticosteroids when it was the standard practice not to use. He fought and testified there with Ron Johnson, with the help of Ron Johnson, on corticosteroids use and efficacy, and then it became the standard practice not 2 months later, which is all around the world, actually, which is an incredible feat. I mean, he certainly helped save an almost unquantifiable amount of lives by doing that and taking that stand. And that's what we try to find. That's who we like to associate ourselves with on the show and have on the show as people who have really laid it on the line, stepped out of the consensus, the status quo, and be proven right. I mean, that's a big deal. It should go down in history that Dr. Pierre Kory stood up when people were afraid. He would go on to be a huge advocate of ivermectin and early treatment, early treatments of COVID-19 and help treat patients away from the mainstream medical system in some sense to get them the care that they needed. I was one of them when I got COVID back in 2021. I think it was 2021, if I'm not mistaken. I was at the Big Three in Las Vegas, and it was a wild time, But I came down with COVID, and I was treated with ivermectin, and I was treated by the entire protocol that Dr. Pierre Kory had put together, and it did wonders for me. Now, again, a lot of people, got over COVID just fine. I mean, we ended up seeing that later on, but obviously being able to treat symptoms and relieve symptoms and give people the optimal care is important. And it was something that he provided alternative to, along with a number of other doctors. So you're about to see a genuine friend of the show, somebody who I trust with my health, a guy that I call when I'm having a random chest pain or a back pain or a little bit of blood in my urine or whatever the case may be. This is a guy that I call and trust what he has to say. So without further ado, the great Dr. Pierre Kory. Welcome back, Dr. Pierre Kory, to the Please Call Me Crazy podcast, Family and Friends episode. It's fitting that we have you on this week, given the confirmation hearings, RFK Jr., big implications for the overall health of the American people, which I know you are veteran in, somebody I trust a great deal. And I want to talk about, a lot of things, especially RFK and the confirmation hearings, but people wouldn't know you were supposed to be the first guest on Please Call Me Crazy. And back then our technology was giving us issues, still giving us some issues some days, but we vaulted that interview because it was so bad. I mean, we just did such a bad job on the production, which hurt my heart. I mean, it's been hurting my heart for a year and a half that we didn't get you on, because I think you're such an incredible person. So I want to first, before we get into the RFK confirmation hearings and where the COVID stuff is now, the emerging research on ivermectin. I especially wanted to ask you about ivermectin as a potential anti-cancer medication. Sure. But first, I want to go back to the beginning to try and fight the algorithm of YouTube, I'm sure we're going to be in danger of getting this episode removed, although we'll be streaming it on other platforms. But I want to try and substantiate you with the start of the pandemic with the corticosteroids fight. And if I'm not mistaken, you were on the front line of that fight and saying, hey, we should be using corticosteroids. There were a lot of people who were against it in hospitals all across the country. Can you tell me a little bit about how that went down briefly, if you can?
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, it's good to see you, Royce. Good to be back. Yeah, lots to talk about. But yeah, you're going to go back to the beginning of COVID. So if you remember, I mean, you know my story, but beginning of COVID, I was chief of the critical care service at the University of Wisconsin. I was a lung specialist. And me and my colleagues, with Paul Marek, we got together. We saw that the government was not putting forth treatment guidance. Everywhere around the country, they were just saying supportive care only, stay home till your lips turn blue. And we were in the ICUs and we were seeing super sick patients on ventilators. And it was clear to us that in severe lung inflammation and damage, that corticosteroids were indicated, and everybody was scared to use them. One of my colleagues in the FLCCC, the nonprofit that we formed in order to kind of disseminate, medical guidance, because the government was failing, the institutions were failing. We got together a website, we put out a protocol which had corticosteroids, but we knew it was needed because one of my colleagues was one of the world experts. His name is Umberto Meduri. He was one of the world experts of corticosteroids and critical illness. And they had done an exhaustive review of the SARS and MERS epidemics. And they knew from the review of all those studies that corticosteroids was a huge factor in survival. And so we were telling everyone to use it. We had tons of data. There was even data coming out around COVID, but it was being ignored. And as you know, I got asked to testify in Department of Homeland Security by Senator Ron Johnson because he discovered our website and our protocol, and he called me, and he was just really angry. He said, "I want the doctors to take their gloves off. We got to do something here, and they're not providing any guidance." And so I testified about that. And although at the time I was viciously attacked, even by my own institution, because I was going against, consensus. But I was validated a couple of months later. It became standard of care worldwide. Wow. And so we were ahead of the game on corticosteroids. We were ahead of the game on ivermectin, although I can't say I was fully validated on that one because that one launched a whole disinformation war that was really intended to suppress and distort the evidence of efficacy for ivermectin. But, that's a whole other chapter. But yeah, you're bringing me back to the beginning.
Yeah.
We were getting stuff right from the beginning.
Well, and I say that just because, again, it's obviously a much different time now. It's kind of crazy to even watch how drastic the narrative has changed, from the start of the pandemic until now. Obviously, I was treated for COVID by you, and I used ivermectin, and I felt better. Now, I wasn't as early in my treatment. I was probably about 3-4 days into being diagnosed, maybe 3 days into being diagnosed or having tested positive, but I immediately felt better the next day. And I've used ivermectin since as prophylaxis. And, a lot of people that I know use ivermectin and have great reports with it. Speaking of ivermectin, how, just to go back to middle of the pandemic, how crazy was it to watch the FDA and the mainstream media, as somebody who spent a lifetime in medicine, off-label medication use, so on and so forth, how crazy was it to watch them say that ivermectin was a horse drug, an animal drug, with the whole Joe Rogan situation?
Well, that was already deep into the war when they did that. That was a PR campaign that was very highly coordinated in terms of time and what they did. I mean, they had the agencies really come out with this horse dewormer narrative led by the FDA. But that was August of 2021, Royce. I mean, when I testified around ivermectin, it was December of 2020, and I didn't know anything. I was really naive. I literally thought that testimony would be welcomed, appreciated. Didn't think I'd get a parade or anything, but what started to happen just confused me. I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I got attacked within a day and a half by the Associated Press. They wrote a hit job of an article on me and on ivermectin, just saying like it's another medicine like hydroxychloroquine to debunk. And I'd spent like 30 minutes on the phone with this reporter. And that was weird. And then our paper got retracted in the weirdest of ways. It was really shady. And I started to know we were up against something big. I couldn't see it. I couldn't feel it. but I knew that the world wasn't behaving correctly. And then little by slowly over that first half of 2021, I realized we were in a disinformation war. Disinformation is what they practice. And I learned about disinformation. I learned about the disinformation playbook. Once it was an article I read in March of 2021 called the Disinformation Playbook, which was written in 2017. And it's about the tactics that industries deploy when science emerges that's inconvenient to their interests. Yeah. And never has there been more inconvenient science than the science around ivermectin. And so I realized I had the entire $1 trillion pharmaceutical industry, laser focused on destroying ivermectin. And that's when I committed to writing my book. I started literally taking notes. I was like, I am documenting everything they're doing. You could see it everywhere. The media, the agencies, the journals, they were rejecting, they were retracting. You saw these narratives and newspaper articles and then jokes, right? The horse dewormer campaign, that was like the peak of what they did. Because I will tell you, after that horse dewormer campaign, it was real different. You couldn't get ivermectin filled in pharmacies anymore. They took it out of hospitals. They're threatening doctors. Doctors were getting suspended, losing their licenses. I mean, it was vicious, trying to suppress one of the safest drugs in history. I don't remember them doing that around fentanyl or oxycodone, but boy, ivermectin suddenly was more dangerous than oxycodone if you wanted to prescribe it. And
wow.
The war, Royce, man. You and I actually lived through it a bit.
Yeah, we lived through it. But what do you make of you traditionally throughout your career and throughout your life, have you been somebody who was skeptical of the industry you're in or the pharmaceutical industry, or was this kind of the onset of an awakening, so to speak, for yourself?
It was you nailed it, Royce. It was the onset of an awakening, a deep awakening. I mean, here's what I thought before COVID. I knew pharma, was gaming the system, but I literally thought that pharma corruption, resided at the level of really attractive drug reps who come in with pens and try to take you out to lunch or dinner and, try to get you to prescribe stuff, or, these doctor trips and dinners. That's how they influence doctors. I literally thought that was what pharma did in terms of corruption. And what I discovered in COVID, it goes so far deep. That's just the icing on the cake, those little pens and trips and stuff. It really goes to the level of the journals, the agencies, the professional societies. I mean, they're all bought, they're all captured, and they all act in sync. I mean, I don't know who's at the top sending out the memos, but boy, you could see them all bobbing their heads, doing whatever they're told. And what they were told was to, at every turn, put down ivermectin, and they did.
And so, what do you make now? First of all, where are you at with your feelings about ivermectin going forward? And then I also want to ask you about the Pfizer drug that came out. That was this cocktail that seemed real conspicuous. It was, what there were rumors out that it was a combination of the same type of chemicals that are found in hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Yeah, so Paxlovid, is that what it was?
Paxlovid, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So and then tell me a little bit about the emerging ivermectin as an anti-cancer treatment. I saw Mel Gibson say a couple of things about it on Rogan's podcast. I had been hearing some rumors about it through the grapevine as well. And so give me where ivermectin is today.
Well, you probably don't know this, Royce, but I think I left my academic career and I started a private practice about 3 years ago, and it's a specialty practice. We've been focusing on treating post-COVID vaccine syndromes as well as long COVID, kind of same disease, two different triggers, but the patients are really sick, very complex. And then about 9 months ago, I actually started a complementary cancer care practice where I use not just ivermectin, but whole combinations of repurposed drugs and nutraceuticals that sit on a really formidable evidence base for their anti-tumor mechanisms. Ivermectin is just one of them. Mebendazole, which is the human version of fenbendazole, metformin, doxycycline, propranolol. There's a whole number of medicines that work against cancer that are safe and well tolerated. It doesn't make the patient sick. And I got to tell you, I've been at it 9 months, and this is what I've discovered. Number one, these medicines work. What I've been able to achieve in my practice is definitely we have a cohort of patients where it's like eye-popping results, like PET scans with lesions are melting. We've had remissions, even in patients who aren't getting standard of care, because I generally advocate for patients to get standard of care, and then I treat alongside, trying to optimize them. But we've had some phenomenal results. But the other thing I discovered is in a lot of patients, what I'm seeing, and at first I was disappointed by this because I wasn't seeing like the cancers like get smaller or go away. But I discovered that in a lot of patients I'm seeing on follow-up, I'm not seeing progression, right? Because that's the definition of cancer, right? It's the uncontrolled growth of cells or divisions of cells. And I'm seeing patients with stable disease, no new lesions, no worsening of lesions, no new symptoms, and they just seem to be like stable. And so it's not like the, kind of the sexy, exciting melting away of the PET scans, but patients are happy, they're doing well. And then obviously I have a cohort where that really didn't respond, it didn't help. So I'm not here to say like we have the cure for cancer. Cancer is super complex. It's a really challenging disease, but all I can say is we're definitely having successes and our patients are happy.
Yeah.
And ivermectin's a mainstay. I mean, I got to tell you, ivermectin, particularly in prostate cancer, it can be like a secret weapon. I mean, I've had some prostate cancer patients where literally the cancers are disappearing. Having said that, I've also noticed I've had a couple of patients with prostate cancer who didn't respond. So it's almost like I'm seeing like some are like exquisitely ivermectin sensitive and others aren't, and I don't have the ability to understand what that is about those patients. I can only see that clinically, but it's been a mainstay for prostate cancer for sure.
Excuse me. RFK and the Senate confirmation hearings. This is a groundbreaking moment, I think, for our country. Obviously, Donald Trump winning, I would say, in my opinion, Donald Trump winning is a repudiation against a lot of these same forces that you're talking about, the corruption at the top and throughout many institutions. Appointing RFK, though, is even more, I don't want to say more, I just want, it's the first time in American history where I've seen somebody appointed that I actually believed would challenge the status quo of the food and health industry. Are you familiar with RFK? I know the same organizations work closely and have some. They support him.
That's exactly right. I mean, my organization, FLCCC, and CHD, his organization, we were closely aligned in mission. I mean, obviously, they're more of law organizations, a lot of lawyers. They litigate and they try to correct a lot of the corruption and insanities by the corporations, whereas we were more of a medical education organization, but we were trying to expose the same malevolence. And so I got to be friendly with Bobby. He called me his hero. He's my hero. And I don't want to like name drop or anything here, Royce, but I was so honored. He actually called me on Saturday, last Saturday, because there was an issue that he thought they would come after him on a particular thing that Trump did early in COVID, and he didn't really know what it was, and he wanted to get my because it's stuff that I had wrote about. It was the bleach conference. You know how like when he was talking about using disinfectants, and the entire world's media said that he wanted people to inject bleach. Do you remember that whole story?
Right.
And so Bobby thought they were going to come after him on that, and I basically told Bobby what the real story was on it. But anyway, he's a friend of mine. I consider him a friend and a colleague, and I have the deepest respect for him. I think he is one of the most deeply studied, knowledgeable, sophisticated people I've ever met. I mean, his command of the data and the evidence and his ability to like interpret and surveil science, like he knows all of the pitfalls in science, all of the censorship that's been going on for decades in science, where they won't publish inconvenient papers, right? And so like you saw it in these hearings, right? These senators, we have 16 papers saying that the vaccines are safe, and I'm watching Bobby, and I know Bobby knows the truth. Bobby knows that those 16 papers are curated, published in the literature, and there's 35 other papers that are like, buried in like third-tier journals that totally contradict those. And, it was hard for me to watch because they didn't give him a chance, and they don't allow nuance, right? Everything is black and white, either repudiate this, commit to this, say yes or no. And it's a much more complex topic than that. And, you know it, I know it. But he's the guy who, I mean, his command, not only of the scientific literature, how to explore it, how to interpret it, but his knowledge of the command and control of the agencies, of regulatory capture as a lawyer who's been fighting corporations and institutions. I mean, he has an exquisite knowledge of just how to untangle that and unpack it. And Royce, I want to finish with this because I was thinking about this yesterday. If he doesn't get confirmed, who else is ever going to present as a even reasonable alternative to him. There's nobody like him in our country to really be that guy to fix the complete collapse of our public health agencies. They do not work for us. They work for pharma, and that is an existential crisis. He is the man of the moment in history. I mean, if they actually reject him, I got to tell you, I think not that there's going to be a rebellion or a civil war, but I really do think a good portion of this country will absolutely, just be destroyed. I mean, I don't know that I'll break down crying, but I can't imagine that this country would miss this opportunity to hire a great man to help us out of this nonsense.
Yeah. On the vaccines, where are you at with the vaccine research? What is the vaccine research that you've come across brought you to?
Oh boy! All right, you're asking the big questions, Royce. So,
I was vaccinated. I'm unvaccinated for COVID, completely unvaccinated for COVID, but I was vaccinated for childhood vaccinations.
Yeah, same here. You and I both. And before it gets even worse, Royce, because before COVID, I have 3 daughters. They were fully vaccinated for all childhood illnesses as per whatever schedule they were under. It's a lot different than the schedule you and me or I was under when I was young. But I never questioned vaccines. Even when the COVID vaccine came out, I was mildly encouraged, although I was already skeptical because I'd known that they'd been trying to develop coronavirus vaccines and it was failing at the animal level. I can't remember, monkeys or apes were dying more viciously if they got vaccinated than if they weren't, something called antibody-dependent enhancement. So I had concerns around the COVID vaccines, and then that just led me down the path. And Royce, I'm just going to be brief. Once I started seeing injuries pop up around me, people reaching out to me because they were injured, some of them disabled, and then I was looking at VAERS, looking at other stuff, and I just found horrors everywhere. The data was screaming how toxic and lethal this mRNA vaccine was, let alone my discovery and writing and research on shedding. So I went deep into COVID vaccines, but then I started to read books on the history of vaccines, and I found that these myths that were taught in medical school, that they're myths, they're not evidence-based. This constant refrain, and you heard it in the hearings, about how smallpox vaccine rid us of the smallpox epidemic. That is completely false. The opposite is true. If you really look at the history of smallpox, the vaccine made things worse. And yet, our history was written as if the vaccine cured that epidemic. Same thing with polio. It's another narrative and myth that we rid ourselves of polio. There's more polio-like paralysis in the world today than there was during the polio epidemic. And we know why, because it wasn't polio. It was mass use of pesticides and DDT that was causing paralysis in all of these kids. And you could see the spikes and waves. And also most of the childhood illnesses, the deaths from them had literally plummeted to near zero by the time the vaccines for those diseases came out. And yet, what are we told historically? That the vaccines eradicated child. No, it didn't. We know that now. It was personal hygiene, sanitation, water purification, getting rid of slums and the pestilence in some of the inner city neighborhoods that fostered and breeded these epidemics. And so vaccines had very little to do with it. And so you ask me where I am now. So that's one thing. The overstating of the efficacy and the miracle of these vaccines is a myth. Then there's the other side to it, which is and I learned this from ivermectin in terms of the censorship at the journal level, the propaganda that the journals play. But the burying of adverse events and the toxicity of these vaccines, they go hand in hand, right? It's safe and effective, right? So they propagandize both, and the pharma does this around every product. But the safety of these vaccines has never been shown. In fact, it's been suppressed. This idea that there's no link between vaccines and autism is laughable. just laughable. There's immense amounts of data. There's no other explanation for the massive skyrocketing rise in autism rates and ADHD and allergies. They all parallel the explosion in the childhood schedule. So for anyone to say that there's no link, there's plenty of links. They've done studies comparing unvaccinated, vaccinated kids. There's a recent one in the last few weeks showing much higher rates amongst the vaccinated for all of those important diseases. So we know that there are really negative consequences to vaccination, but you never hear of them, right? All you hear is how effective they are and how safe they are, and it's an easy decision. Anyone who questions it, there's something wrong with them. They don't know the science. And that was one of the themes of this week. You heard senator after senator on one side of the aisle completely. Royce, I mean, I'm not saying anything that's new to you, but watching that, I literally felt, I mean, I could feel it, that they were getting paid to say that. The things that they were told to said, those narratives were like literally to say this to Bobby and to the American people. And they just kept putting out little pharmaceutical talking points, attacking Bobby. And it's really kind of disturbing to watch, Royce. I mean, these are the people leading our country, and they're bought and paid for and talking for corporations. It's sad to see.
And again, to reiterate, you traditionally, if you feel comfortable saying, but what I know of you, traditionally, you weren't some right-wing Republican citizen.
I am now.
As many of us have made the,
like
the walk across Rubicon.
Lefties, man.
Right, like
Royce,
Tulsi.
I was a dipshit New York City liberal, man. I believed in government. I thought the government were the good guys. I thought they made the playing field fair. I thought that was their job, right, is to protect us against moneyed interest and give the little guy a chance. And that may have been true at one point. I think last century, I think I think of myself more as a Kennedy Democrat. I think Kennedy and his family last century and some of the legislation, if you look at last century, 60s and 70s, both sides were working together to enact policies and legislations to support Americans and the little guy. And somewhere along the way in the last 50 years, they switched it out. And now you got corporate interests running the government. And the rest of my old Democrat colleagues have not figured it out. They're still praying to a false god, what is now a false god. I mean, if they think that the government has the interests of the people as their primary consideration, if that was ever true, it's so blatantly untrue now. And so I am not pro-government. I much more relate myself and identify myself with conservatives now for sure. The idea of small government staying out of my life, don't dictate anything to me. I'm not looking to government for anything at this point, just to leave me alone. Because they have exacted so much damage and destruction. I mean, come on, Royce, look at our country. Excess mortality, which began in 2020 and accelerated in 2020, it's still going. We have massive excess mortality. I've written numbers of op-eds. I wrote an op-ed in early 2024 where we were looking at the data for 2023, and 158,000 more Americans than were expected died in the first 9 months of 2023, which is more than all of the wars, including Vietnam, since World War II, including Vietnam combined. And so, and yet no one's saying anything.
What do you attribute it to? What is there something you have identified as the majority of possibility of? Was it okay?
So the correct and scientific answer is there's numerous. It's multifactorial.
Of course,
right? It's this, that, and the other thing. And yes, I'm not putting global warming on the list, but there's definitely a few things that are going on. We know overdoses and drug addiction is fueling some of it, but that hasn't skyrocketed. That's been a problem for a long time. We know, for instance, car accidents, whatnot, but I mean, the big driver is the vaccines. I mean, the toxicity and lethality of that mRNA platform, how they've managed to suppress that at the major media level is still almost, how should I say, it's like almost an incredible feat that they pulled off, like how they can still prevent the average American from understanding how toxic that is. It just shows you the level of propaganda and censorship that we're under. And the vaccines are the major driver in terms of the excess mortality that started in 2021. And the life insurance industry knows that. Because how do I know that? Because you have this massive rise in young people dying not necessarily of suddenly new causes. Like I was just reviewing a paper this morning because CHD, one of the reporters for the Defender, sent me a paper that was under embargo. It's apparently going to be published today in JAMA. And it was their review of the excess mortality in young people, 25 to 44. So by the way, 25 to 44-year-olds, they don't die except it's drug overdose or accidents, right? I mean, it's very rare for a young person to die. And they're dying. They're dying at rates we haven't seen before, and that's increasing. And some of the categories were like other natural. What category is that? What natural cause of death occurs at 25 to 44? And so there's this category of other natural, and it was the one that's increased the most, which tells you that's a little bit of a mystery category.
Is it cardio? Is it cardiovascular? Is it
that was separated out? So circulatory, digestive, endocrine, cancer. You could see all those, and those had risen. But that category of other natural seemed to, it was outpaced all of the others. And I'm like, what is this new mysterious, vague category of young people dying? And so don't you think we should know more about what's driving that? Well, what is this other natural? And so, but I've already done the analyses of the life insurance industry. I mean, 2 years ago or 3 years ago in 2021, the CEO of One America, like $100 billion insurance company, the guy came out, a CEO, and said that they have never seen a year-to-year rise in mortality amongst young people that they did in 2021, particularly the third quarter of 2021. They'd never seen that in all of their actuarial tables outside of wartime. You suddenly had young people dying at increased rates that they had never seen. It was like 40% increase rate. And what the guy said is, in his business, in life insurance business, a 10% rise in mortality in an age group from year to year is a 1 in 200 year event. Remember, what do they do for a living, actuaries and life insurers? They study, demographics, epidemiology. They know death rates like they know nothing else. And suddenly, in 2021, they saw this huge, and it wasn't COVID. They said that. It was partly COVID, but it wasn't COVID. And so that is a major, I think, crisis for a country, and yet nothing to see here. Go on, safe and effective. And so people are dying and we're not talking about it.
Yeah, scary times. I mean, I worry. I know a lot of people who were vaccinated. Again, I chose not to take the vaccine. None of my children took the vaccine. So I do know a good cohort of people who didn't take the vaccine. I think if you remember, one of the telltale signs of how bad the mainstream media wanted to push a specific narrative about the vaccine was with Kyrie Irving, the basketball player, who I'm sure you're familiar with, New York guy. He didn't play there when you were living there, I don't think, but you New Yorkers are typically lifelong fans of your sports teams.
I like my.
There you go. There you go. But anyway, yeah, I mean, Kyrie Irving was adamant that he wasn't going to take the vaccine. And the entire mainstream media, sports media first, but then the rest of the mainstream media came down on him with a 2,000-pound anvil, and they made him seem like he was crazy. And he's a bit eclectic. I'm not going to say that he's not unique for a professional basketball player, but that's not saying much because all of us professional athletes, we're kind of assembly lined in a way. We look unique to the average working class citizen, but really, all the NBA players get interviews, they talk the same way, right? I mean, because they know how much money's on the line, and the slightest thing that they say wrong.
For you, Royce, I'm pointing that out. I'm giving you nice props
Well,
here,
hey,
man. You're not one of those guys.
There's a reason why I didn't last long. But but Kyrie was adamant, and just looking back now, again, I echo what you're saying. I can't believe that the narrative's still being upheld. What do you have? Here's my question to you: do you have faith? Because often on the show, I talk about big ideas, geopolitical ideas, like the entire post-World War II democratic liberal order, the global dollar empire, and these big, geopolitical, what Eric Weinstein called the load-bearing walls of the entire global society, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have confidence that with the right people in place, the medical industry as it sits now with the institutions it has now can be salvaged? Can Donald Trump and an RFK salvage it, or is the corruption and the consequences of what's been done over so many generations or a couple generations, do some of these institutions have to go completely?
If you'd asked me that a month ago, I would have been much less optimistic than what I'll say now, only because watching what Trump's done in what first 10 days of office or whatever it is, 2 weeks, with these executive orders,
Yeah.
you know, he's already vastly transforming how government is functioning. And I mean, he's really upending dogma and entrenched kind of systems. And so now I'm like kind of encouraged that big things can happen. I thought maybe there would be some peripheral marginal changes, you know, things that we could like feel good about, but don't really mean anything. Whereas now I'm seeing what I think is substantive structural redirecting. And if Bobby gets that mandate and support, I mean, I would just love to see what he can do. I think he can make big changes. Probably the number one is to make those agencies transparent. They sit on data that we need, and they sit on data that's inconvenient for their bosses' interest, bosses meaning pharma. And so just the transparency alone, I think, will take us a long way to making us healthier and smarter. But, you know, going back really quick for a second to Kyrie Irving is that, you ever see those cartoons, Royce, where like they have like a whole mass of people and they're all kind of shouting the same thing, and then there's like one person to the side, you know, and like they get attacked? Like there's this whole thing, this tribal mentality that when you kind of dissent or object or pull yourself out from this crowd, man, that crowd turns on you, right? And it wasn't just Kyrie Irving. I mean, look what happened when Aaron Rodgers came out and said he wasn't vaccinated.
Right. Another guy who wasn't a conservative, right?
The entire country of Australia, what they did to Djokovic. I mean, it was insane. He'd already had COVID, and they thought he was like a baby killer. They wouldn't let him play in the Australian Open. They deported him. I mean, history cannot forget this mass insanity that was going on. And by the way, I don't want to call the world and say like we're the only two smart ones. What I think of it is that people were propagandized to death, and it made them behave in very, very strange and disturbing ways. And for me, it just showed that most people don't have the resistance to the propaganda. They are easily led. Remember, my definition of propaganda, which I learned from Mark Crispin Miller, who's a famous professor of propaganda from NYU, who also didn't get vaccinated, lost his job, his colleagues attacked him. You know, you get the whole story, right? Yeah. But Mark's a friend of mine, and his definition is propaganda is a story or a message to get you to think or act in a certain way. And I think that's a really powerful definition, because I saw how everyone behaved in COVID, and they were all thinking and acting in very manipulated ways, right? And they were demonizing the unvaccinated because the televisions told them to, right? They were rah-rahing everyone to get vaccinated because the televisions told them to. You know, when I say televisions, it's newspapers, it's everyone, it's the talking heads, the agency leaders. But so you saw these coordinated narratives that just everyone followed. And so like, if you're not a skeptic or a dissenter, or you know, challenging what you're told or turning off your TV, you're in trouble. You're going to be influenced. You're going to be doing some really dumb stuff. You're going to be doing what they want you to do, right? And I know you know this stuff, yeah, Royce, but we need to remember that's what happened in COVID. And by the way, on that point, you know, I remember during the height of that psyop, when really, if you had anything negative to say about the vaccine, even the vaccine injured, remember that? Like they literally put the vaccine injured suddenly were outside of the crowd, right? They got injured, they started to talk about it, and then they were attacked for being anti-vax. They got vaccinated, and now they're anti-vax. Like, that's how ludicrous.
I don't mean to laugh, but yeah, it's ludicrous. It's lunacy.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was just madness. Yeah. And so I think we can never forget that.
I got a few more questions for you. I know you're a busy guy, one of the busiest guys out there saving the world. The first one is, I got like 3 questions. This one's a short one. Dr. Fauci, getting a pardon. What do you make of that? And how crazy is it to still see people? The craziest thing for me as a 33-year-old, I'm not young, but I'm certainly not old. I've seen a lot of things go on in this country and around the world. I had the privilege to live in a society where you can see a lot, right? Technology has allowed us to see more than maybe anybody in, you know, any other society in known human history. The craziest thing I've ever seen is that people still wear masks. What does it do to you when you, as a doctor, from a critical care doctor, what do you think when you see people still wearing masks, even though Dr. Fauci came out and everybody else has came out and said they definitively didn't help, or they don't help?
I'm going to play that note that I just played again. Is when I see someone in a mask,
Yeah.
it's almost like they should have written on it, "I am a victim of propaganda."
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's just a scared person who's believing in the only thing that they can believe in, which is the authorities, and the authorities are telling them to wear masks. Although they're not really saying that anymore. So I think also people just have different risk tolerances, and they're just scared. And that's the thing. I mean, with all this stuff, all this propaganda, it's also there's a big push of fear behind it. So you do have people who are still scared. They don't know what to do, and they're trying to take some control over a really uncontrolled world. And so they put on their masks as that they don't have a better idea than that. And
Do you think
I
the
look
masks
upon
do the masks? Do you think the masks actually make people sick in some sense?
I don't. There's
Is it because they
definitely
said you're touching your face, changing the mask all the time, taking it on and off, you're touching your face more than you normally would?
I don't think there's evidence for that. I get
Okay.
some of the rationale for thinking that there's negative consequences to masks. I don't think it's increased rates of infections.
Got it.
But certainly they're not helpful.
Okay.
I think they really aren't. You could have a nuanced discussion around N95s a little bit, but I don't want to get into masks.
Yeah,
anymore.
got it. Last two questions for you. First one is, as a lifelong doctor, if there was one thing you could change, if there was one institution, policy, practice, thing that you've seen in the industry over your career that you would change, what would it be? You got the gavel, you got the pen, you got the ability to say this is what needs to go or stay. What's the one thing that you're gonna start to change?
I'm just going to be really honest with you, Royce, and come what may, but I would dismantle the whole vaccine apparatus. I think for several reasons. I think that they're destroying the health of our children and our country. Do you know what it's like for a family to have an autistic kid who's nonverbal? Their entire lives are altered from that moment forth. I have patients who have vaccine-injured autistic kids who are totally dependent on them, even as adults. They know their kids will never leave the house. They need to be home all the time. Caring for someone like that is so destructive to not only the child's lives, the parents' lives, and there's many, many of them out there. That's just one little snippet of the vaccines. And number two, like I said, they're unnecessary. They're built on myths. And the illnesses that are exploding, like this chronic disease epidemic that Bobby talks about, a lot of us talk about, there's other causes, right? Our food is getting polluted, our food additives, agriculture, pesticides, but vaccines are a huge one. And I know the data. Unvaccinated children are far, far healthier than others. And then, so what would someone scream at me when I say that? They were like, "Oh, you want a child to die from measles?" I'm like, are you kidding me? You know how many kids die from measles? It's extremely rare. They'll tell me if we get rid of the vaccines, it'll come back. Not true. That's not what drove all the measles epidemics in the past. That's number one. Number two, we have really good antivirals. I know of a few more, which you can talk about later on, that I've discovered, but we have ways to treat those illnesses that you just don't need the vaccines. And I just think in terms of health, I am so angry for having been lied to for so long. The books that they write about vaccines are just false. They're false. And remember, the entire legislation in 1985 came about because the vaccine manufacturers threatened to stop manufacturing vaccines. Why? Because, and it's in the act in 1995, because they were deemed unavoidably unsafe. And they could not be liable anymore for all the injuries they were causing. So what happens is Congress gives them immunity. And what do? With that immunity, they explode our schedule, and they're jabbing every kid, and they're weaponizing. They're using legal mandates. Kids can't go to school in a lot of states and communities without getting fully vaccinated. And you know how many patients I have, family, like parents, come to me to save their children. And in some states, if they come to me, I tell them, here are your options: homeschool or move. Not everyone's got the disposable cash to do those two things. They're working all day. They can't just decide to homeschool. And but many of them are brought to that decision point because they don't want their kids to get vaccinated. And so I got to tell you, I think that whole vaccine myth needs to be taken down slowly or quickly or somehow. But people need to educate themselves on that. And I include all of the doctors. And I would offer 2 books. One is Dissolving Illusions by Kathleen Humphreys, and the other one is a masterpiece of an academic work called Turtles All the Way Down, written by 5 anonymous Israeli scientists. And they so expertly go through the entire evidence base for vaccines. And it's a devastating conclusion that we've been lied to around vaccines for so long.
Another question for you. One is on a more casual note, or let's not say casual, but on a personal note, an individual health basis note. All of the things that you've treated and you've seen over the years of your career, what's the one health tip you would give the American people as a general sort of, this is one thing you should be doing that's gonna help you be healthier, in general?
I like it, Royce, because you're giving me one answer, so I'm going to pick one. Vitamin D.
I knew it.
Vitamin D. And keep in mind, I really do think that you want to have optimal vitamin D levels. It protects you from so many different illnesses, not just infectious illnesses, but cancers, autoimmune diseases, you name it. And I just want to say one more thing about vitamin D is that my book, right, called The War on Ivermectin, was inspired by someone who wrote me an email one day in March. And that's who led me to that article called The Disinformation Playbook. And it was this world-renowned vitamin D researcher. Didn't know who he was, wrote me an email. He said, "Dear Dr. Kory, what they're doing to ivermectin, they've been doing to vitamin D for decades." And then he included a link to that playbook. By the way, the Disinformation Playbook was invented by the tobacco industry when things started going south for them with the cancers. So they spent 50 years corrupting science, trying to convince you that cigarettes were safe. But vitamin D is such an interesting story because if you look at the published medical literature, for every positive study, there's 3 negative studies. And so if you actually look at the published literature, vitamin D is good for nothing. But that's because they've polluted and destroyed the scientific evidence for vitamin D. And if you know that, I think it's the single greatest thing that you can do for your health is to have like an optimal vitamin D level.
Vitamin D. The quick story, when I first got diagnosed with anxiety, I was fortunate enough to have a doctor who was unfazed by the propaganda. The first thing she gave me was a bottle of vitamin D she had in her purse. You know, here in Minnesota, we're above that line, right? Where we spend a lot of months in the winter cold inside hibernating and things like that, mostly making babies. But the vitamin D been good for me as well. I need to make sure that I'm staying on it. Last and final question. I have great skepticism now about there was something that came up in these confirmation hearings, and Tulsi alluded to it, but it was about antidepressants. And I want to get your opinion on antidepressants and the school shootings. I saw the most disgusting thing I saw in the Senate hearings, RFK and what they tried to do to him was up there, but the single most disgusting thing I saw was Senator Tina Smith from here in Minnesota, who I'm going to be going up against in 26 now. She came, her and Amy Klobuchar are two birds from the same feather, 2 feathers from the same bird. But anyway, she just openly defended the pharmaceutical industry and made this strange claim that I didn't know whether she was being ignorant or just flat out lying. I tend to think that these politicians just flat out lie, because hard pressed for me to believe that Tina Smith, a sitting U.S. senator, isn't aware that Eli and Lilly and all these other psychiatric medications have had black labels on these drugs for a long time. She basically said that school shootings, that psychiatric meds or antidepressants have no impact on school shootings whatsoever. I mean, is that what do you make? What do you even make of that?
So, number one, I have a colleague who writes pseudonymously under the name A Midwestern Doctor. They have written brilliant analyses and reviews of the roles of SSRI in terms of all of the gun violence and particularly school shootings. There are cases where we don't know what they were on, but there is so much information on so many of these school shootings. SSRIs were involved. Most of the shooters were on SSRIs, number one. Number two, actually, this is number one. There is a black box warning on the SSRIs, which says one of the side effects is homicide. Why is there how can they talk about this in the Senate when literally you just have to take out the insert and it says homicide? Do you know what it's like, what it takes to put that black box warning? You don't put it because you think it might cause homicide. It's because there's overwhelming evidence that it does cause people to commit homicide. And so we know those are dangerous drugs. And many people, when they start, it's usually within first few days to weeks of start, they suddenly get overwhelmed with suicidal and homicidal thoughts that they can't defend themselves again. Totally normal people who started those drugs suddenly turn homicidal or suicidal. And if you go really deep, because I know others who really are expert at this literature, they've gone down to the original studies done by these pharmaceutical companies on the whole class of drugs of SRIs. They were burying those events. They've been hidden. They've done studies where they didn't publish. Now, that's the other thing. Pharmaceutical companies do studies and then they don't publish them. Right? If it's inconvenient, they'll just be like, yeah, let's put that one on the shelf. So there's a wealth of evidence showing how dangerous those are in terms of increasing the risk of both homicide and suicide. So I'm with you, Royce. Watching that stuff, it's like it's theater. It has no relation to reality. It's all you said. Is it ignorance or lies? I think they'd like to claim ignorance, and if it's willful ignorance, though, they probably don't investigate and they just say what they're told to say. And I don't know what kind of politician or human being you are. If you're going to go out in public and make a statement, like I would never make a statement in public, Royce, unless I was really studied and had formed a very thoughtful opinion based on hours of study. Yeah. If you ask me a question, I don't really know the literature or something, I'm going to say, Royce, it's not in my wheelhouse. I don't really know too much about it. I happen to know a lot about the SSRIs, and that's why I answered that question. But other than that, you never hear anyone say, I don't know. They just come out with an opinion and they shove it down your throat and they don't even know what they're talking about. So that's what Bobby's up against. He's talking to nincompoops who know nothing and they're spouting, pharmaceutical narratives.
And they're so arrogant about it, aren't they? I mean, they're so pompous and brash about it. They're brazen. And a person like Tina, I happen to think that a person like Tina's lying. She's another one who's up there on the top 10 list of getting a lot of money from Big Pharma. I know, RFK called Bernie out for being at the top of that list. He tried to give some excuse and workaround for it being workers and not PACs and, blah, blah, blah. It's not hard yeah.
Royce,
go ahead.
I got to tell you, so my colleague, a Midwestern doctor, they put out a tweet 2 days ago, which is the biggest tweet I've ever seen. It got, from somebody who's not very well known, it got as of yesterday, it was 22.2 million views. But in their tweet, they ranked the pharmaceutical money received by all those senators that we watched in the hearing. And it was literally I think it was Warren, Sanders, the other guy with the C. But the people that were the most vicious and the most fogal and unhinged in those hearings, you could see it totally correlated with the list of how much money they got. The craziest ones were all at the top. So it was a perfect correlation between the behavior in those hearings and how much money they take from the pharmaceutical industry. It was. I think it struck a chord with a lot of Americans because that tweet went out viewed by 22 million people, 30,000 retweets or something like that. I think people are pissed. The game is up. The gig is up. I think people are figuring out. Most people are figuring this out.
Yeah, well, at least they're skeptical, and they're starting to be more skeptical, and rightfully so. I'm excited for that. When we get into these murky waters where people don't know who to trust, obviously it increases the chance of somebody else coming in and giving disinformation and so on and so forth. I mean, it's just an endless rabbit hole. But what is not debatable is we've watched the medical industrial complex and whatever other people and powers that are pulling the strings behind it lie to Americans and people all over the world. I just couldn't believe what they were saying about ivermectin. I honestly, it's a wonder drug on the record, millions and millions and millions of people saved. All of a sudden, COVID hits, pandemic hits. Ivermectin is the greatest enemy to mankind. It was mind-boggling. But We appreciate you. Tell us about FLCC and where it's at. Do you guys had a name change? Where do we find you and your work?
Yeah, I don't know because I left the FLCCC about almost a year ago.
Okay.
I'm working with another nonprofit now, and I have my practice. But yeah, I don't know what they're doing. They changed their name or something.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm still working on helping patients, and my new nonprofit is focused on kind of driving research and attention to repurposed drugs,
Yeah.
particularly research. I hope Bobby gets in there. I know he really wants to take the FDA's, chokehold on research for a lot of different cheap alternative therapies, and I hope we can expand our therapeutic armory as a result. Instead of just the pricey patented, barely tested pharmaceuticals. And so I'm looking forward. I'm still working hard, still trying to help.
Yeah.
So all is good.
Well, we appreciate your time, Dr. Pierre, Kory. Thanks for being on the show. Let us know when you have some free time again, and hopefully we get RFK Jr. in. We'll see what groundbreaking changes he makes, which I'm sure going to be immediate. And we'll get you back on to get you to weigh in on some of those things as they unfold. I appreciate you being on, man. Thank you.
For sure. Thanks, Royce. Good seeing you again, man.
Good to see you too, brother. God bless. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Pierre Kory for the Family and Friends guest episode this week, and we plan to start bringing on more guests again. For a while there, we just had the Family and Friends guest episode be me and Professor Penn, or Hebrews took the place of our Family and Friends guest episode. But now that Hebrews is going to be moving to its own channel, we have the space to bring on more guests. Really, now that I'm done with the campaign and I can really reach out to people and square up schedules to make it happen, we're going to try and have more guests like Dr. Pierre Kory. But the reason why it's so important, obviously, RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearings this week, and a lot of ongoing questions about health and vaccines and pharmaceutical companies and lobbies, and all of this is very politically relevant. But the number one reason I wanted to have Dr. Pierre Kory on is I think he's genuine and honest, as you could probably see and tell for yourself. But B, another one who is not a traditional conservative or Republican. He told you right there, a typical New York City liberal. And it doesn't get much more liberal than New York City, all right? Only maybe Minnesota. Actually, the campus there in Madison, Wisconsin, where Dr. Pierre Kory, I think, worked at in the intensive care unit at the university for some time as well. But it doesn't get much more liberal than New York City. So you're not talking about guys who were lifelong Republicans, conservatives, people who were America Firsters or racist or fascist or part of some Nazi cult. I mean, you're talking about people who believed in the liberal mainstream media, believed in the liberal mainstream propaganda, believed in the institutions, believed in the consensus, believed in everything that your typical CNN, MSNBC, and even in some cases Fox Newses of the world would affirm. These people they're not crazy. Number one, they're not crazy, but number two, they're not lifelong radicals. They're not conspiracy theorists. You're talking about a guy who was literally treating people and has been treating people in critical care. I don't think people really grasp what that means. That means, there's going to your doctor and it's like, hey, I'm having an issue, give me some medicine. Let's try this. Let's try that. Things resolve. You're okay. You never even see the inside of a hospital for the most part. You're talking about somebody who is taking care of patients who are on death's door. And the decisions that he makes as an ICU doctor or a critical care doctor for really, really sick, ill patients is gonna be life or death. Is gonna make or break whether they survive. This guy's people who encounter life at that level, they tend not to have time to bullshit, right? Because the consequences, their time is too precious. One. But they've seen the darkest consequences of life. I'm not saying that you won't find an ICU doctor that tells some lies, but this isn't an ordinary guy. This is not only is he not a far right wing conspiracy theorist, he's not an ordinary guy. He's actually treated people and saved people's lives on a daily basis. on a daily, weekly basis, saved lives in the intensive care unit. So, to see the mainstream media try to discredit a guy like Dr. Pierre Kory and all the others. I mean, he's not the only one. There were tons of doctors who are highly credentialed, who are highly tenured, that were attacked and made out to be, conspiracy theorists and quacks. And that might be the greatest disservice that was done during COVID. First of all, the lives that were lost, the lives that were affected. That goes without saying. But the most egregious thing that was done outside of that may have been all of these people who spent their life in their respective field, spent their life in their respective profession, gave their lives to save lives, whether it's law enforcement officers or physicians or scientific researchers or, you name it, military men and women, who actually were on the front lines, like a Tulsi Gabbard, who signed up to serve her country. And now we're watching as people try and discredit them as though they didn't see what they saw or hear what they heard. And history will judge. That's the thing. History is not going to look favorably on the establishment during this time, during this era. And it's already started to happen. All they're doing now is upholding the narrative with the propaganda, as Dr. Pierre Kory so eloquently stated. And they, don't get me wrong, they have a lot of power. It shows you how powerful they are, that some of these narratives are still even standing. It also speaks to a lack of courage from the American people and people all around the world who accept narratives from their government, who don't believe in self-governance, who don't believe in critical thought, who need to be told what to do. And that's what our show's trying to accomplish, really, is to inspire people, to motivate people, to encourage people to think for themselves, be confident in breaking away from the narrative. Understand, if not, you will be susceptible to tyranny. That's maybe the craziest thing about all the people who identify as liberal or Democrat, supported Kamala or whoever it is, Joe Biden, Obama, you pick one, Hillary Clinton. I still see people saying that they wish Hillary had won. I mean, what planet are you living on? You don't like Donald Trump, that's fine, but to affirm Hillary Clinton is it just blows my mind. But the crazy thing is, all of these people complain about fascism and Nazism and tyranny and Adolf Hitler and, pick somebody. They never talk about Stalin until it comes time to fight a war with Russia, a nuclear war. Then all of a sudden we bring up Russia's entire history, except for their communist, totalitarian, and religious genocide during the time of World War II. We never talk about that. We don't want to go there. If we go there, you're anti-Semitic. That's what they called me. They said I was anti-Semitic because I said the bad guys won World War II. The Allied forces included the other main power, Stalin, communist Russia, were genocided Christians to the clip of 10 million conservatively. 10 to 20 million. The number, they don't know, how big the number is. Now, that's not to say the Nazis were good people. Obviously, they were not. It would not have been better had the Nazis won. What you have to be mature enough to understand is sometimes there are bad people on all sides of any conflict. Or let's say there are bad people in charge. Because I'm sure there were Germans who were fighting for the German cause who were good people, relatively good people, who thought, hey, we're just fighting for our nation. I'm sure there were Russians who were fighting under Stalinist Russia who thought, hey, we're just fighting for Russia. Just like there are American soldiers who fought in the war of World War II, World War I, the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, who thought, hey, we're just defending our country. We're just defending America. You ask them now, a lot of them have a different opinion. A lot of them feel differently about it looking back. Tulsi Gabbard being one of them, served in two great Middle East wars, and now she's coming right out and saying, hey, the Obama administration and others as well, helped fund Al-Qaeda. Whether they did it knowingly or unknowingly, this is the way that the process worked. This is what happened. And it's a disgrace to the memory of the soldiers who served, to the brothers and sisters, our American brothers and sisters who gave their lives or gave a piece of themselves, gave their their sanity even. It disgraces their sacrifice to withhold that truth. Well, the same thing goes all the way back to World War II. And the only reason I bring that up is somehow, some way, there is a, a demographic in this country who still believes in the Democrat agenda as being separate from the powers and forces who corrupted industries just like the one that Dr. Pierre Kory lived in, worked in, has served in, and has seen firsthand. Somewhere in there, there's a disconnect. Dr. Robert Malone called it mass formation psychosis. Dr. Pierre Kory's talking mass propaganda. Some of it's spiritual. Some of it's within us. Some of us, and I try to take things down to this level so people can better identify it in themselves. Yeah, there's mass formation psychosis. There's mass propaganda. But what there really is a lack of faith, and I'm not saying, hey, if you have faith, all things will be healed, although we as Christians do believe that. But what I'm saying is from the outset, part of us craves tyranny. Part of us likes misinformation. We like being lied to. There is a part of people, there's a part of the human condition that's susceptible to being lied to. We like it. Why? Because it's more convenient. Ignorance is bliss. If I don't know, then it doesn't hurt me. Well, that's not really true. It feels true. It seems true. You can connect with that in many ways. It's like all these videos that are coming out now where you take a pack of ramen noodles. I'm from the hood, so we used to eat ramen noodles back in the day, and now my mind is blown on that front too. I'm forever sick, nauseous, you could say. They're taking a pack of ramen noodles, breaking it open, and they're putting the noodles underneath the microscope, and you can see, these microscopic organisms crawling around. They're infested. And I don't say that to spoil anybody's dinner. I know there's somebody out there that's going to have to eat a pack of ramen noodles tonight, and hopefully we can change this country so people have better food, and the food is better, better processed, better prepared, and all of that starts to change. But my only point is, you'll hear somebody say, oh, you ruined it for me, right? You ruined ramen noodles for me. You ruined McDonald's for me. You ruined whatever it is. You ruined ice cream for me. Whatever it is. You get that information, you'll hear people say, oh, you ruined it for me. And I understand that. People don't want it to be ruined. And some of it can be obnoxious, like hot dogs. If you actually found out what they put in hot dogs, what meats went into a hot dog, I mean, if you were able to actually see the process, if you were able to actually identify that, you wouldn't want a hot dog, right? I mean, and there are a lot of people who go vegetarian and vegan, and I make fun of them a lot, although I probably shouldn't. Because they've actually looked into that process, and by looking into that process, they no longer want to put those things in their body. Another guy that I know is Dame Dash, very, very famous record producer, Rockefeller Records. He went vegan or vegetarian, I may think, but he doesn't eat meat. And when he sent me the video of how the process of meat in the factory, and the I don't even want to say it. I'm not even going to spoil it because I still eat the meat, right? But at least I was willing to take the truth and say, you know what? I'm going to hold my head. I'm going to hold my nose when I eat this chicken, but I'm not going to protect the lie. If somebody asks me an honest question, do I think the way that meat is processed today is healthy for us? I'm going to say no. I don't think so. Do I think it's hard for Americans to find healthy food? Yes, and I think that's why it's important that RFK gets confirmed. Because it gets to a level where the government and the corruption and the institutions, the government and the institutions have such widespread corruption, such lack of integrity and standard. It has a sort of blanketed effect on the people that they preside over. And I talked about this with the military, where I said, we have socialized the sin of the post-World War II Democrat liberal order and the global dollar empire. We have socialized the sin. We have essentially, extended the culpability to every single person who put on the uniform. And they get it now. The veterans get it. I can't tell you how many Purple Heart recipients and and Medal of Honor and Valor and former military men and women that supported me during my campaign. I can't tell you how many. And they say, look, we served our country. We love the military. Obviously, we support the military. We want our servicemen and women to get the care that they deserve, but we're not going to continue to shill for these wars. We're not going to continue to shill for the military-industrial complex, one that, just by matter of fact, doesn't even want to kick enough back to make sure that our veterans are cared for properly. But it's the same thing in medicine. It's the same thing in food processing. We have made things in this country so corrupt that it's hard for your average American citizen to even find food that they can, reliably believe is healthy. Now, that's a troubling reality of our country and our society. It's like, the pesticides, for example. You think you're eating organic or you think you're eating, pesticide-free or gluten-free. And, who knows? Maybe you are. Maybe you're not. Better to try than not. I mean, I know a lot of people are trying their best to eat the best that they can. But when push comes to shove, the Monsantos of the world, the Cargills of the world, I mean, let's talk about it locally, politically. Cargill, okay, right here in Minnesota. Biggest privately owned company in the world. Probably dangerous for me to even say that. There are all types of corporate espionage killings and assassinations. We saw one there with the United Healthcare CEO. Not to say that was, some hit job from another corporation or something like that, but I'm just saying, dangerous to say that Cargill is a part of the problem of these world health epidemics. This is a reality. It's dark. But this is what you got to, if you want to save a country, if you want to save a republic, you have to become comfortable with confronting these things. And there's one thing that I'll say about the MAGA movement, the conservative movement, the America First movement, Donald Trump supporters, is that we are at least willing to confront the harsh and dark reality. We're at least willing to acknowledge that we may not be, we may have not been told the whole truth. In some cases, the worst case, we may have been egregiously lied to and misinformed. At least we're willing to go there. Now, you can call us conspiracy theories. Oh, Royce, you said investigate Maui. Oh, now you want to investigate the wildfires in California too? Yeah, I'd like to investigate all of it. Because I know about MK Ultra. I know about Operation Paperclip. I know about Operation Barbarossa. I know just how corrupt and efficient the deep state and the intelligence community and some of these government institutions can be. I know how deep the rabbit hole goes. MK Ultra, another good example. Trying LSD and other psychoactive drugs on military men and women. We love. You can't say both things at the same time. You can't say. I saw Kash Patel's, Amy Klobuchar. Kash Patel said that he would turn the FBI headquarters into a museum of the deep state. She's so quick to defend the intelligence community. She's so quick to defend the institutions that we all know have been involved in obscene corruption, obscene dealings, not only here in this country, but all around the world. And she's so quick to defend them. She was irate. She was beside herself trying to defend the legitimacy of the current FBI. I don't find the current FBI to be legitimate. Are there legitimate people in it? Are there good people in it? Yep, same way as militaries all across the history. Same way as the medical industry. Yeah, there are good people everywhere. There are unbeknownst people everywhere. But the institution itself can be corrupted by a few. And it's corrupted. It's corrupted. MK Ultra. And we're so gullible as to think that these programs just stopped. No, they were just renamed. They were just taken deeper underground. MK Ultra, they're setting up brothels. You want to talk about the sexual culture of this country and where it started? Let's go back to MK Ultra. And the CIA is setting up brothels for military veterans, veterans and law enforcement, other people as well. But there were some veterans in there. There were some military men and women in there. And they got two-way mirrors, and they're drugging them and watching them through a two-way mirror, watching them have sex through a two-way mirror. with prostitutes? Our government paid for this? Our taxpayers paid for this? But the stories that make the headlines, the stories, and it's just funny how it works. The stories that made The Daily Show, Stephen Colbert, The Daily Show, what's the other guy's name? John Oliver, was me spending $1,200 at a strip club, at a gentleman's club. I still call them gentlemen's club. That's what they're called. But a strip club in Miami on food, in liquor. That's the line. That's where we're going to draw the line on morality, sexual morality. Not that the entire CIA or the intelligence community needs a full forensic audit and probably a lot of things disbanded based on the things that they've done, like MK Ultra, where they use brothels and prostitutes against our own veterans, servicemen and women, law enforcement officers, or even just regular American citizens, civilians. All of it's obscene. But see, we're so selective. We want to pick and choose. And you see, nothing ever came of the allegations against me for the $1,200 at the strip club. Why? Because I was telling the truth. That's all. It was a mistake on the filing. That's it. You know, we would have reimbursed it. We tried to reimburse it. We tried to change the credit cards. That, you know, the circumstances didn't allow us to do that. And somebody filed the FEC report wrong. That's it. But it's $1,200. It's not $1 million that I'm getting from the pharmaceutical company to shill that antidepressants don't have a black label warning on them about homicide. Tina Smith. I'll wage my sins against yours any day of the week. I'll wage RFK Jr.'s sins against yours any day of the week. I'll wage Tulsi Gabbard's sins against you all's any day of the week. Kash Patel, Steve Bannon, Donald J. Trump, Dr. Pierre, Kory, you name them. I'll put our sins up against you guys' sins any day of the week. And that's the fight now for the future of this country, to save this republic. Nobody's going to be perfect. But when we say the lesser of two evils, this election had a lot of, the lesser of two evils in it. Let me tell you, they don't even compare. Honestly, they don't even compare. Don't even come close. You need an example? $1,200 at the strip club versus the trillions of dollars. Trillions. It's like, and you all, it's you blue collar Democrats out there, you blue collar liberals out there, you're going to stand next to this establishment that would just as sure drop a hammer on your head over taxes that you can't possibly pay. Why can't you possibly pay it? Because you need every single dollar in order to survive. Because the cost of everything is going up from the same lobbyists that fund these people's campaigns. They're price gouging you. They're inflating the currency. They're inflating the price. They're inflating the cost of living. And you're going to stand with these people, and they would just as soon bring down an iron fist on you for not being able to make ends meet and meet the tax burdens that you may have, or whatever the case may be. And they'll make an example out of you. They'll make an example out of you. They'll turn you into a scapegoat to try and hide the real financial crimes that they're a part of, that they orchestrated. They continue to orchestrate. I hope you all out there are understanding. When you see a Dr. Pierre, Kory, you're not looking at a lifelong Republican, a card-carrying Republican. You're not looking at a lifelong conservative. You're looking at a New York City liberal whose life's work has been in the ICU, in medicine, saving and treating the most sick people amongst us. To even do it deserves the utmost respect and admiration. I can't imagine what some of these critical care doctors go through. The burnout, just the psychological trauma of watching people die right there in front of you all. I can't even imagine. It's like our military men and women. Can't even imagine what it's like. You can have an opinion on it, but you can't really imagine what it's like. Some of our law enforcement officers can't imagine what it's like to show up at a residential home in some neighborhood across this country, and one of the parents is just a complete psychopath and has lost their mind, and has killed their own child and dismembered the body and put the head in the freezer, or some sick, this stuff happens across the country. Can we prevent it all? No. But can we have some respect for the people who do that type of thing, who do that for work? Yes. And the least respect we could give them is when they step up like Pierre, Kory did to say, hey, we should use corticosteroids. Let's get away from all of this consensus and regulatory red tape. Let's do what's going to help the patients. The least we could do is give them the respect not to discredit them, even if you disagree. I mean, I'd have been fine if MSNBC and CNN and Good Morning America, okay, Michael Strahan and the Regis and whoever else, not getting on them specifically. I just named the first host I could think of. Joy Ann Reid, Joy Behar, all of you. I would be fine if you guys had said, you know what, we just disagree. We don't agree with this. We think that this person's wrong. We think that they're not getting this right. And we want to advise against listening to this type of misinformation. If that's what you wanted to do, I'd have been fine with that. But to try and discredit these people on a general basis is disgusting. You all should be ashamed of yourselves. Those who have tried to discredit the doctors like Pierre, Kory, who spent a lifetime treating the most sick people in our society, should be ashamed of yourselves. And there's a reckoning coming, and you deserve every single bit of it. Every single bit of the shame and the discredit that you try to wage on other people now you have to live with and sit with. You deserve every single ounce of it. And I love Kash Patel going after Amy Klobuchar. I love RFK Jr. going after Bernie. I love Tulsi Gabbard saying the Obama administration has been involved in regime change in the Middle East the entire time. I love where we are today in America. That's it for me. We'll see you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern on Real America's Voice for the Royce White Show. We're going to be talking more about some of these Senate confirmation hearings. The fight continues. We appreciate your viewership and listenership today and in the future. We'll be back next Monday. Stay tuned. Stay tuned for more. Godspeed to you all. I hope you enjoy the evening. Enjoy the weekend. God bless you all. God bless America. Everything's up on the bar. We're all in. We get to decide. Do you want to live on your knees, or do you want to die on your feet fighting? That's the decision you get to make now.